Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today we are going to look at the trickiest line of the Bogo for black to face. And we are going to be looking at the move knight b to d2 instead of bishop to d2. So instead of blocking with the bishop, white is going to cover our Bogo check with the knight. So let's get into the opening. So we have d4, knight f6, c4, e6. Again, I've said this many times. Watch the intro video to the Bogo if you're not familiar with the basics, and also it would be useful to watch the Nimzo and the Catalan videos as well as the Queen's Indian, because these openings are going to be fairly similar and ideas are going to be intertwined. So basically, after knight to f3, black has several options. Queen's Indian, trying to go for Queen's Gambit declined, or the Catalan if white goes for g3, and the Bogo-Indian, bishop to b4 check. So far, we have been looking at the main move, which is bishop to d2, simply blocking the check and, well, blocking the check with tempo, as the bishop is attacked after bishop to d2. So black was forced to either play queen e7, c5, a5, take, or retreat the bishop. Today we are going to be looking at the Grünfeld variation of the Bogo, which is considered by most Bogo-Indian players to be trickier than the main lines. And I've spent a long time trying to understand why that is so, and I think I came to a decent conclusion. So let's try to explain this move. Well, firstly, with the move knight b to d2, white is not misplacing his bishop, he's misplacing his knight. If you play bishop to d2, you cannot really play bishop to b2, which is where you would like to have the bishop. When you play knight b to d2, you cannot really play knight to c3, which is where you want the knight. I should mention that knight c3 is possible in this case, which just transposes to the Nimzo Indian defense, so I would advise you to watch the Nimzo series for that. Bogo-Indian players are going to have to be prepared for the Nimzo. Okay, what else does knight b to d2 do? Well, it sort of leaves this bishop hanging in the air and gives black the option to do whatever he wants. Black can do several different things here. I'm going to go over three main options for black, which are b6, d5, and castles, and I'll try to explain the differences between these moves. But basically what white is trying to do, he's trying to play the move a3 in most lines, forcing this bishop to capture the knight. So white has the bishop pair for not that much. In most Bogo lines after bishop d2, the bishop trade, even if it's traded for the knight, gives black enough play, and black can employ a dark squared strategy with his pawns on d6, e5, and this bishop isn't really needed. In this case, for example, let's play b6, which is the main line. I'm going to get the theory. If a3 is played, you simply cannot retreat the bishop back, so you have to trade. If you retreat this bishop, then e4 comes in for free. And as we know, in most Nimzo, Queen's Indian, Bogo types of positions, if e4 is played, white is fine. Of course, he would rather have the knight on c3 than on d2, but this is still fine. He can expand with b4, bishop b2, sometimes play e5, sometimes play for d5. He can still fianchetto, he could still play bishop d3 and go for a nice attack. So knight b to d2 is a very tricky move to face, because it actually comes with a threat, and the threat is unavoidable: winning the bishop pair or allowing e4. So, as you are going to see in most lines, black is not going to have as much activity as after bishop to d2, and what's much more important, black is not going to have a clear plan. In all the videos we've covered so far in the Bogo series, I gave you a clear plan for black. I will try to do it here, but I think it's pretty much impossible. And the positions get extremely complex, wild in some cases, and unclear in a sense that you are not sure what to do. You will have things to defend, you will have attacking ideas, but mostly on the queen side, and they will not be as clear as in bishop d2 lines. So before we get into b6, which is the main line, castles, which is the main alternative, and d5, which is the third most popular option, I would like to mention two sidelines. which I wouldn't recommend, and those are c5 and a5. These moves against bishop d2 make a ton of sense, and I have recorded separate videos on both. Now, people who play these moves against bishop d2 may be tempted to play them here. Now, they're by no means losing moves, they are not too bad, but they are not ideal. Let's start with a5. After a5, white plays a3, and now of course you have to trade, because if you retreat, the bishop e4 comes, so bishop takes d2. It's possible to take with the queen or with the bishop. One advantage of taking with the bishop, which we are going to see in most lines, is that when the bishop captures, the bishop is free to pin on g5. And of course, since white is trying to achieve e4, that's going to be very useful, and sometimes bishop g5 is going to force h6 g5 to prevent e4. If you don't play it, then e4 comes and e5 is a threat, and white builds not only a center, but white will have a wall of pawns from a3 to e4, and that's scary and almost impossible to play well against. So the idea here, which I find extremely strange, is to play a4, preventing the expansion on the queen side. Now queen to c2, simply threatening to play e4, and d6, e4. If you play d5, then you end up with a very bad pawn structure because of this pawn on e4. Now knight c6, bishop to c3, this is a great bishop, queen e7, bishop to d3, and now you basically have to play e5, otherwise e5 comes from white. So e5, d5, the knight goes back. And the thing here is, if this pawn was on a5, then you have a bit more control over the dark squares. You are controlling the b4 square, and plans like knight d7, knight c5 could come in handy. However, in this position, white can already start a queenside attack with c5, and of course you don't want to take this because you drop this pawn. Taking here isn't really that scary, so you can still castle, but with the two bishops pointing at your king, with ideas of knight d2 and f4, with ideas of taking, with ideas of b4, with ideas of c6 at some point, white has a lot to play for. So a5, I honestly wouldn't recommend. You can be tempted to go in for that line if you play the Vitolins against, if you play a5 with Mislov against bishop to d2, but here it's just not as good. c5 also, a3 comes. Now again you have to take, so takes, bishop takes, and c takes d4, and here black is going to be playing a sort of Queen's Indian slash, I don't really know what to call that position. You would like to achieve b6, bishop b7, but it's going to be very hard. After knight takes d4, you basically have to play d5 to try and equalize. c d5, queen d5. And even though this may seem pleasant, your queen side is still undeveloped. So after castles, bishop to b4, for example, attacking the rook, rook to e8, and knight to b5, you already have things to sort out in your position. If you take the queen, then this is going to be, well, a threat, so you are going to have to play knight a6 anyway. Now, for example, queen takes, knight takes, and as you can see, it's going to be hard to do much because you are sort of tied down here. You still have to develop your bishop. White is probably going to have enough time for this, and you shouldn't be in too much trouble, but it's very hard to equalize here. White has too much activity and white has the bishop pair. So in this type of position where you don't have any dark squared control, you gave up your bishop pair for nothing. So all endgames are going to be better for white. So these are the two main alternatives to the three sensible moves. Now let's start with moves that are good, d5 and castles, and then I'm going to get to b6, which is the main line, and definitely the best attempt for black to try and equalize. Now d5. There's a very specific problem with this move, and if you are familiar with the Ragozin, playing bishop to b4 and the Queen's Gambit declined, you can see that this is very similar. There is a problem with this, well, a potential problem, or a strategic idea which white could go for, which makes black's play kind of worse. And that's the move queen a4. Now, of course, you don't want to lose your bishop, so you play knight c6. And this may not seem like much, However, after a3, bishop takes d2, bishop takes d2, you can see that it's going to be very hard to challenge the center with your c pawn. So this blocks the c pawn. You were forced to play knight c6, which is a move you want to play if your pawns are on d6 and you're trying to play e5. If you have a pawn on d5, you don't really want to play knight c6. So if the pawn was on d6, this is fine. And you can go for your dark squared strategy, which we saw many times. However, here it's not going to be as simple. Knight e4 is the best move, rook d1, castles, e3, white just develops sensibly. You can take the bishop. I mean, this knight is actually better than the bishop now, but still you have problems with the c pawn. Bishop to d7, queen drops back to c2 and f5. And there are attacking ideas in this position, of course, and you are sort of playing the Dutch or the Pillsbury attack, which white usually does in positions like this. But you have to remember that white has this bishop on d3. So when white does this, there's a bishop here, and it's pointing at the king side. So without your dark squared bishop, you're not going to checkmate him. You can try, I don't know, let's say bishop to e2. You can try bishop e8, transferring your bishop. You can try bringing the queen in, sort of Dutch ideas, but it's not going to be easy because you have the bad bishop. In these sort of stonewall structures, this bishop is not really helping in the attack. You would like to trade it off. If you do trade it off, then of course attacking potential is reduced. Also, with pieces trading off, these are going to become much more powerful. Also with the center opening, these are going to become much more powerful. That being said, d5 has been played by some of the best players in the world. For example, I'll just read you a few: Nisipeanu, Nigel Short, Granda Zuniga. So it's not a bad move. If you play the Ragozin, this could be a nice addition to your repertoire. You will be used to those positions. I wouldn't recommend it. Now, the other move I would like to discuss is castles. Now, white has to be prepared for all of these. That's why I'm showing you all of these moves. If you're facing the Bogo, then you have to know what to do against d5, and I would recommend queen a4. And against castles, which has a very specific idea, I'll show you what to do. So, the first thing that should be said after a3, which is the most sensible move, black can take. And taking is going to transpose to the main lines, where eventually black plays b6. And if we started with b6 in this position and a3 and takes and castles, we are now in the main lines, and this is all fine. Black castles eventually. However, after castles here, there's a specific idea, and that's that black is trying to retreat the bishop back, allow e4, play in the center, and either go for a French structure or go for a typical Bogo dark squared strategy, which is going to be harder to employ with this bishop in the way. And of course, the idea is bishop to e7. Now, white of course plays e4. We saw that this is the best idea. So white basically achieves what he wants out of the opening. He got e4 in for free, with a slight concession of having the knight on d2 instead of c3, but that can be remedied. Okay, so now the two options I would like to talk about is d6 and d5, and players who play castles and retreat the bishop are going to choose one of them. d5 is something I would be very scared to do, because after e5, knight d7, you're playing a French defense with, of course, this is a sort of Tarash where white has a pawn on c4 instead of c3, and black doesn't have that many issues. Personally, I play the Tarash with white, so I enjoy positions like these. I would like to have my knight on e2, but that's a different story. However, after bishop to d3, you can see that white's pieces are already coming in, and a slight error could even give white the possibilities for a Greek gift sacrifice. And this is going to be a typical French. So black has to play c5. And with the pawn on c4, this is slightly riskier, because at any point white could take cd5. However, there's an even more interesting plan of punishing this. And when I was looking at this position, I started analyzing the position from white's perspective and trying to find ways to punish the move d5, and h4 is very interesting. So there are pieces flooding in, and if you're not careful, there's going to be knight g5, there's going to be bishop h7, there are going to be many sacrifices, and you're likely going to lose. So g6 is the safe move, however h5 now. This is scary. cd and queen c2, and already this becomes almost unbearable. Now I'm going to turn on the engine. The engine says it's 0.000. That doesn't mean much for a human. I mean, white hasn't committed his king yet. Black's pieces are, except for these two, all undeveloped. It's not clear how you're going to defend this. So after e4, playing d5 is very scary. You're going into an inferior French defense, not according to the engine, but basically normal French ideas don't work for black. Okay, so the alternative is d6, and now black gets a sort of normal setup. You're trying to play for the dark squares, knight b, d7, queen c2, and e5. And this is okay. This, I think, is fine. White is rerouting his knight, you're playing c6, knight c3, you're playing a6. So basically you're trying to control the center and play the move b5. However, after something like rook d1, queen c7, bishop to g5, bishop to b7, it's not really clear what you're doing here. And I personally would struggle to find a plan here for black. I'm not sure which side of the board to play on. If you've read any Silman or Agard books, then basically you should be playing on the side of the board where you're stronger. And on the king side, black definitely doesn't have anything. In the center, there's a ton of tension. Black has some control, but not much. On the queen side, I'm not sure that much is going on. So in this position, people have played queen b1, queen b8, white plays b4, black develops the rook. I'm not sure black has an advantage on any side of the board. This is the wall of pawns which I've mentioned, which gives white a ton of control. Of course, there's so much tension in this center that any trade could change the nature of the position, so there's no one way to play this position. I think playing castles on move 4 is a great option for high-rated players, which will be counting on the fact that they are going to outplay their opponents later on in the middle game. So there was one game from this position with d5 and d5, and now both sides are sharing the d file. c5 is hard to play. This bishop is, I'm going to say, bad. If you don't play c5, why is your rook on c8? The rook should be on d8. Could white close the position down and play for a4? Does black play a5? Can black get a knight into d4? I'm not sure. Should I play h6? I mean, this is very hard to play. So after knight b to d2, I don't think castles is a good practical choice, because even if you play well, you're going to get a position in which it's not easy to find a plan. Oh, all right, so now let's get to b6. b6 is the best move. Now, here's why you can afford b6. If bishop b4, bishop d2, black has to do something about the bishop, and whatever you do, for example, queen e7, which is the main move, which we saw yesterday, white is in time to play g3. And in these sort of dark squared setups for black, having a bishop on this diagonal is very powerful. Now, after knight b to d2, black doesn't have to do anything about the bishop, so he can afford to play b6 straight away. So this is by far the most sensible move and the best way to try and equalize. Now, white has several options. He could play a3, chasing the bishop away. That's the main move, but he can also avoid doing that and play with e3 or g3. g3, I think, is interesting, trying to challenge this bishop straight away. So bishop e7, bishop g2, castles, castles. And you're playing a sort of Queen's Indian defense now. So for this, I would advise you to watch the series on the Queen's Indian. This is going to be very thematic. And now d5 is possible, bishop d2 is possible. I think bishop d2 is the most interesting way to play this position. Queen takes d2, d6, playing a normal Queen's Indian, b3, knight bd7, bishop to b2, queen e7. I think any rook to d1, but rook a makes more sense. And now bishop e4. This is all very thematic, and this I'm sure you are familiar with, and something like this. And then black shouldn't have any issues in this position. It will, however, be very difficult to go for an advantage, and probably have to play c5. You're not really that strong on the queen side, so it's going to be tough to do much here. But this is fine. Also, white could go for e3, which I'm going to say is not as scary, because this bishop is going to be better in the attack. So whenever the bishop goes to d3, there are more attacking ideas for white. Whenever the bishop is on g2, this is more positional and trying to restrain black. So bishop e7, bishop d3, castles, castles. And now you have to take a stand in the center with d5, and a3 you don't have to trade now because e4 is prevented. You have these three guys, so you can save your bishop pair. White expands on the queen side, c5, you have to challenge the center, bc5, bc5, rook b1 attacking the bishop, bishop a6, knight e5. And it's obvious that if anyone is better, it should be white, because his pieces are more active, he has a lead in development, and after something like c takes d4, e takes d4, we have an IQP position, or a potential IQP position, in which these look pretty nice, the queen looks nice, this bishop is sort of a problem, but white should hold a slight edge. Of course, it's risky to play like this, and if you trade pieces often, white could find himself in a worse position with an isolated pawn. But these are very rare, and most people in this main line are going to play a3. So now finally let's have a look at the critical positions. So after a3 we said that bishop e7 runs into e4, so you have to take. Taking with the bishop is more dangerous because of bishop g5. Taking with the queen is the main line. Let's have a look at bishop takes first. You continue your development, and now bishop g5. Now the idea behind bishop g5 is that eventually white is trying to play the move e4, for example queen c2 e4 or something similar. So the principled way to play is to chase this bishop around, and you will be familiar with this from bishop g5 Nimzo positions. It's going to be very similar. So bishop h4, d6, e3, knight bd7, bishop to d3. And now of course, if black doesn't play g5, then it is possible to play e4 in some positions. So g5 is the principled way to play, bishop h3. And now you could play this safe, but there's a problem. You cannot really go to the king side, because it could easily be opened up and undermined. White hasn't committed his king yet. You don't really want to go to the queen side because of b4 and c5, and position blows open. So there's only one way to play this position, one good way, and that's to go for king side space. So h3 and rook g8, trying to play for h4, g4, and the queen develops to e2, queen develops to e7, white finally gets to play e4, and now h4, bishop h2, and knight h5. And I would feel uncomfortable in this position with both colors actually, but that's me, that's subjective. Again, I think this is something a higher rated player would have an advantage in over a lower rated player with either color. The engine says it's plus 0.2, so the engine X is basically equal, plus 0.4 now with the move b4. However, it's going to be very important to be able to calculate quickly and accurately, and to be able to find your way through the complications. Both kings are going to be unsafe. Of course, a liquidation of the center is going to give white an advantage because of the two bishops. For as long as the center remains closed, then that's not really an advantage. But yeah, I think it's scary to play positions in which trades are not good for you. And, well, White has more space, so trades benefit black from that perspective, but pawn trades in the center are going to benefit white, so it's going to be very sharp. And the alternative to bishop takes is queen takes, and this is less scary. I think it's better for white to play this way, because he's going to have more ideas later on in the game, and it's not clear where this bishop is going. Of course, it could still go to b2, and the queen could be useful as well. So after queen takes d2, we continue with bishop to b7. It's possible to play g3 or e3. e3 is the main line, and now castles, bishop to e2, d6, white castles, and knight b to d7. And again, we are going to be faced with this wall of pawns. We have the e4 square under control, that's fine. However, after b4, knight e4, queen c2, f5, we have a Dutch/Queen's Indian position in which the queen side just belongs to white, and that's clear enough. There are no doubled pawns. There's really not that much attacking potential on the king side yet, and white is able to get a very pleasant position. I'm going to show you how. This should be the starting point of the main line of the Bogo with knight d2, and it's important to know what you can do here, what you can play for here. The problem is that white is sort of in the driver's seat, and white could play slow moves like bishop to b2. That's going to be fine. White could also play rook d1. White could also play knight e1 and try to play f3, knight d3 to control e5. However, one move which has to be taken into account basically on every move is d5. And this does two things. Firstly, it breaks up black's central control, takes up a ton of space. If you take, it blocks your bishop, and more importantly, it gives this knight a beautiful square on d4, and this knight is going to be a menace in your position. So it's possible to take e takes d5 and allow knight to d4, play for something like queen f6 and cd5, bishop d5, but c7 is a problem, f5 is a problem, this knight is loose all of a sudden if f3 comes. I would never take on d5. There's just too much going on in this position, and it's all in white's favor. And when the bishop gets to b2, you're going to have to prove something very quickly. So after d5, the principled way to play is e5, closing the position down. However, knight d2, getting rid of your best piece, takes, bishop takes. And now you're struggling for a plan. White is not doing much on the queen side yet, but you're not doing much on the king side, and you basically have to break up this center. Otherwise, this bishop is going to be a bad piece. It's going to take too long to transfer it somewhere here, and it's going to involve playing f4, which is always going to be scary. Doing this will take up way too much of your time, and white can probably just expand on the queen side. So the sensible thing to do here is play c6, and this is an idea we know in the Bogo, and this is what black has to be doing. However, when this trade happens and f3 happens, blocking in this bishop, again, if we assess the position, where are the weaknesses? d6 is a definite weakness, and it's the only one on the board. If I'm white, I have a clear plan. I can play bishop c3, for example, and I can line up everything on the d file. And if black is forced to defend, then I have a practical advantage. Black can try undermining the queen side, and that's fine. This is going to be hard to react to. If b5 happens, then of course black is immediately better. You have the c5 square, and you're strategically very close to winning. However, white doesn't have to do anything. If you trade, I mean, nothing's going on. You're going to trade off a pair of rooks, and all of a sudden b6 is a weakness as well. It's going to be very hard to achieve d5. So after something like a5, for example, rook fc1, preparing to push through with c5, queen f6. Maybe rook d1 now. Rook fd8, putting pressure here. Maybe bishop e1 or bishop c3, but bishop e1 seems slightly more enjoyable. You have a lot more options. You can also put pressure on the b6 pawn. King h8. I don't know. I was struggling to find moves for black in this position. It's not that white is immediately winning, but white has targets and you don't. White has the bishop pair and you don't. So again, in my opinion, if this is the best you can get, and according to theory, this is what black should be playing for after knight b to d2, then I'm not going to say the Bogo is an unsound opening. I'm going to say it's a risky opening in a sense that it's going to be very hard to play the middle games. If you play the French or the Caro-Kann or the Sicilian or the Semi-Slav, you know what to do. You play the Semi-Slav, you want to play c5 or e5. And then you want to put your bishops on b7 and then just destroy white's king side, or you want to create a passed pawn on the c file and win. If you play the Caro-Kann, you want to, well, get your bishop outside of the pawn chain, play e6, c6. e5 is a problem square, but you have counterplay with c5. You have attacking ideas. If you play the French, you play c5, f6. You have a bad structure, bad bishop, but there are things to do about that. Here, I'm not sure what to say. I'm not sure what to play for. It's possible to attack the queen side, it's possible to prepare d5, it's possible to attack the king side, even though it seems highly unlikely. Sometimes f4 is good, sometimes e4 is good. Sometimes trading off all the rooks and going into an endgame will be okay, sometimes it will be losing. So if you play the Bogo-Indian, my advice is against knight b to d2, play b6 and learn it by analyzing a ton of Grandmaster games. I've been through about 20 games, trying to look for different ideas, and it's not easy, but the more games you see, the better your understanding of the opening is going to be. This video is definitely not going to be enough. It's going to be 1% of what you have to know to play against the Grünfeld variation correctly. I hope it helps though. Hope I gave you at least some useful information. Let me know what you think. And yeah, stay tuned for more chess. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.